If the human slave fails to satisfy the insatiable queen, he'll be executed like the others Jeffrey Kane hadn't planned. On becoming a pleasure slave to an alien queen, then again he hadn't planned on losing everything at the Andromeda. Casino Either Life had a funny way of throwing curveballs, and this one was headed straight for his face at a faster-than-light speed. The holding cell in the slave trader ship hummed with the low vibration of its engines. Jeffrey sat on the cold metal bench, his muscular frame barely contained by the tattered black tank top that clung to his sweat-dampened skin. His dark brown curls fell in messy tangles around his face, matching his thick, unkempt beard. The scuffed black boots he wore had seen better days, much like their owner. "Get up, human," growled Thorax, the six-armed Centurion slave trader. "Her Majesty's transport has arrived." Jeffrey stood, his chains rattling. "Any chance we could negotiate a payment plan?" "I'm good for the credits, just need some time." Silence. Thorax mandibles clicked in irritation. "Your lucky Queen Nario even considered purchasing you. The others." He made a slicing motion across his throat with one of his upper arms. The docking bay door opened with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a sleek silver shuttle. Two guards in crystal and armor emerged, flanking a tall, elegant figure that made Jeffy's breath catching his throat. Queen Nera moved with liquid grace, her pale, grayish lavender skin seeming to shimmer under the harsh baylights. Her long, wavy white hair cascaded down her back like a frozen waterfall, and her steel-gray eyes pierced through him with predatory intensity. The black corset dress she wore, trimmed in gold, left little to the imagination, its plunging neckline drawing his gaze despite his better judgment. "This is the specimen." Her voice was like honey laced with poison. "Yes, Your Majesty." Thorax bowed so low his man nearly scraped the floor. "A prime human male as requested, strong, healthy." And he paused meaningfully, "reportedly quite vigorous." The Queen circled Jeffrey slowly, her heels clicking against the metal floor. He felt like a prize stallion at auction, but kept his head high, meeting her gaze whenever it crossed as her lips curved into a small, amused smile. "You don't seem afraid, human," she observed, stopping in front of him. "Fear's not really my style, Your Majesty," Jeffrey replied with a slight shrug. "Besides, I figure if you're going to kill me, might as well face it standing tall." One of the guards stepped forward, raising his weapon. "You will show proper respect to Queen Neria," raised a hand, stopping him. "I find his canner refreshing." She reached out, running a finger along Jeffy's jaw. Her touch was cool, sending an involuntary shiver down his spine. Tell me, do you know why you're here?" "I heard rumors," Jeffrey said, keeping his voice steady despite her proximity. "Something about satisfying Your Majesty's particular appetites, and about what happens to those who fail. So you know of my reputation." She smiled, revealing teeth that seemed just a touch too sharp. "Yes, I've gone through quite a few pleasure slaves. None have lasted more than a night. Most," she gestured dismissively, "didn't survive the attempt." Jeffrey met her predatory gaze with his own. "Well, Your Majesty, if this is to be my last night in this universe, I intend to make it memorable." The Queen's eyes widened slightly. Then she threw back her head and laughed, the sound echoing through the docking bay. "Oh, I do like this one Thorax. He has spirit." She turned to her guards. "Take him to my private chambers. Ensure he's properly prepared." As the guards moved to escort him, she leaned in close, her lips nearly brushing his ear. "For your sake, human, I hope your confidence is not misplaced. It would be such a waste to execute someone so intriguing." The guards lead Jeffrey away, but not before he caught one last glimpse of Queen Maria. She was watching him with an expression that mixed hunger with something else, curiosity perhaps, or was it hope? Either way, Jeffrey knew one thing for certain: this night would either be his last or the beginning of something extraordinary, and he intended to give it everything he had. The preparation process was surprisingly thorough. Jeffrey was clean-groomed and dressed in what he could only describe as the galaxy's most minimalist formal wear, black silk-like pants that left little to the imagination and nothing else. "Her Majesty prefers her entertainment accessible," explained the attendant, an androgynous being with iridescent skin and clean, very clean. "How thoughtful," Jeffrey muttered, running a hand through his now nam curls. They trimmed his beard too, though allowed him To keep it at his insistence, any other tips for survival? The attendant paused, glancing nervously at the door. The mothers they tried too hard to please her treated her like a goddess. It annoyed her. Interesting, Jeffrey filed that information away. Thanks for the tip. One more thing, the attendant added, lowering their voice. Her previous favorites lasted longer when they made her laugh, but none made it past sunrise. Before Jeffrey could respond, the chamber doors swung open. 2 guards entered, different from the ones before. Her Majesty awaits. The walk to the Queen's private chambers felt like a march to execution, which Jeffrey supposed it might well be. The palace corridors were a maze of crystalline architecture and floating anti-gravity gardens, but he barely noticed them. His mind was racing, formulating strategies, discarding them, then forming new ones. The guard stopped before a massive door made of what appeared to be liquid metal. Enter, commanded a voice from within. The doors parted like mercury, and Jeffrey stepped through into what had to be the most opulent bedroom in the galaxy. The ceiling was a transparent dome, showing the star-filled sky above. The walls shifted colors like aurora borealis, and in the center stood a bed that could have comfortably held a dozen people. Queen Rhea reclined on a chaise lounge, having changed into something even more revealing, a gossamer gown that left nothing to imagination. Come closer, human. Jeffrey approached, but not too close, maintaining eye contact. You know, Your Majesty, I do have a name. She raised an eyebrow. Oh, do enlighten me. Jeffrey Kane, though my friends call me Jeff. He gave her a half smile. When I had friends, bold of you to assume we'll be friends, she purred, rising from the with predatory grace. I don't befriend my meals. Interesting metaphor, Jeffrey replied, standing as ground as she circled him. Though I've always found that meals are more satisfying when shared between equals. She stopped in front of him, steel gray eyes narrowing. Equals, you dare suggest? I dare suggest, he interrupted, and knowing he was probably signing his death warrant, but pushing ahead anyway, that you're bored of sycophants and slaves who treat you like a goddess instead of a woman. For a moment there was absolute silence. Then, to his surprise, Queen Nera laughed, not the calculated laugh from earlier, but a genuine sound of amusement. Well, she said, trailing a finger down his chest, perhaps you'll prove more entertaining than the others. After all, that's the idea, Jeffrey replied, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips. Though I should warn you, I play to win. Her eyes darkened with desire and challenge. Then let the game begin. Jeffrey Kane, as she pulled him toward the bed, Jeffrey realized he might have just bought himself a chance at survival. Now he just had to survive the night and possibly change the course of 2 civilizations in the process. No pressure. The first rays of dawn crept through the transparent dome of Queen Neria's chambers, casting iridescent patterns across the rumpled sheets. Jeffrey lay back against the plush pillows, his tan skin contrasting sharply with the silvery bedding beside him. Neria propped herself up on one elbow, studying him with an intensity that would have unnerved a lesser man who still alive. He observed, trailing a finger along his collarbone. More than alive, actually. You seem me energized. Jeffrey gave her his trademark half smile. Disappointed, Your Majesty. Intrigued, she corrected her steel gray eyes sparkling with something that wasn't quite predatory anymore. You're different from the others. They tried to please me to survive you. She paused, searching for words. You acted as if survival was secondary to enjoyment. Life's too short to fake pleasure, he replied, stretching lazily. Even when death is on the line. The Queen sat up, the sheets pooling around her waist, her pale lavender skin seeming to glow in the morning light. You know, in all my years, no one has ever, she gestured vaguely, matched me, let alone exceeded my expectations. First time for everything, Your Majesty. Neria, she said suddenly. When we're alone, call me near here. Jeffrey raised an eyebrow, moving fast. Aren't we? Yesterday day I was property. Today we're on a first-name basis. Yesterday you were untested. Today, she smiled, revealing those slightly too sharp teeth. Today you've proven yourself worthy of consideration. Consideration for what? Ner rose from the bed, wrapping herself in a translucent robe that did little to conceal her stunning figure. She walked to a floating crystal decanter and poured 2 glasses of something that shimmered like liquid starlight. I have a proposition for you, she said, returning to the bed and handing him a glass one that could benefit us both. Jeffrey took the offered drink, noting how their fingers brushed in the exchange. I'm listening. Once a week you'll come to my chambers. We'll spend the night together. Exploring this unique compatibility we seemed to share, she took a sip of her drink, watching him over the rim of her glass. In return, you'll have relative freedom within the palace after 1 year. If you've proven consistently satisfying, you'll be granted full freedom. And if I decline, then you'll be executed immediately, she said matter-of-factly. I can't have someone who knows my intimate preferences running loose in the galaxy. Jeffrey swirled the luminescent liquid in his glass. Once a week for a year. That's quite a commitment. Are you saying you wouldn't be up for it? There was a challenge in her voice. He laughed. I'm up for it. I'm just wondering what's in it for you beyond the obvious. You could have any being in the galaxy in your bed. Why keep coming back to the same human? Nera's expression turned thoughtful. Because none of them saw me as you do. They saw a queen, a goddess, a monster to be feared. You. She leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear. You see a woman, a dangerous, powerful, incredibly sexy woman, Jeffrey added, earning another genuine laugh from her. So do we have a deal? She extended her hand, formal. Despite their intimate setting, Jeffrey took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he brought it to his lips. Deal, though I have one condition. You're in no position to make conditions, she reminded him. Though her tone remained playful, hear me out. Once a week is our formal arrangement, but if you find yourself wanting company on other nights, I'd like the freedom to accept or decline without it affect our deal. Nera's eyes widened slightly. You think I'd want? I think he interrupted, setting aside his glass and pulling her closer. That we both know this isn't just about physical satisfaction anymore. There's something else here, something worth exploring. She didn't pull away. And what might that be? Chemistry, connection, the kind of spark that makes the universe a little more interesting. He brushed a strand of white hair from her face. Tell me I'm wrong. Wrong? For a long moment, she said nothing. Just Elle studied his face with those piercing eyes. Then slowly she smiled. You're either the bravest or the most foolish human I've ever met. Why not both? He grinned. Why not indeed? She leaned in, her lips barely brushing his. Very well, I accept your condition, but remember, Jeffrey Kane, you're playing a dangerous game. The best ones usually are, he murmured against her lips as they sealed their deal with a kiss that quickly escalated into something more. Jeffrey knew he just committed himself to the most exciting and potentially lethal year of his life. But as Nera's cool fingers traced patterns on his skin, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. After all, he'd already survived one night with a legendary, insatiable queen. How hard could a year be? The answer, as it turned out, would surprise them both. 3 months into their arrangement, Jeffrey found himself in an unexpected position. Literally and figuratively, he stood beside Queen Neria's throne during a diplomatic reception, no longer dressed in rags but in a tailored black uniform with silver trim that marked him as part of the royal household. His beard was now neatly trimmed, his curly hair tamed into something that could almost pass for courtly fashion. The whispers followed him everywhere. The human consort, they say he's lasted longer than any other. Did you hear? She calls for him almost every night now. How does he survive her appetite? Jeffrey maintained his stoic expression, though his lips twitched slightly at some of the more creative rumors. The truth was far more interesting than any of their speculations. Yes, their weekly encounters had become more frequent, but not for the reasons the court assumed. You're smirking again, Nera murmured, barely moving her lips as she acknowledged another noble's bow. What amuses you this time? Just overheard Lady Vex telling the proconsul that I must be using illegal enhancement substances to keep up with you, he whispered back. Apparently I'm smuggling them in through my beard. N's laugh turned into a diplomatic cough. Well, that's a new one, though I must admit your natural abilities continue to surprise me. Only continue here. I thought I was exceeding expectations. Their banter was interrupted by the arrival of High Chancellor Darius, a tall serpentine being whose scales shifted colors with his moods. Currently, they were an interesting shade of disapproving purple. Your Majesty, he bowed deeply, pointedly ignoring Jeffrey. The Council of Elders requests an audience regarding your unusual domestic Arrangements. Nera's temperature dropped several degrees literally, as her species could control their body heat. My domestic arrangements are not the Council's concern, Chancellor, with respect, Your Majesty. When those arrangements involve a human pleasure slave attending state functions, former slave Jeffrey corrected pleasantly. Current royal consort, though I prefer entertainment specialist, has a nice ring to it, don't you think? The Chancellor's scales turned an alarming shade of red. This is precisely the problem. He shows no proper respect, no understanding of his place. His place, Nera cut in, her voice sharp as winter frost, is exactly where I wish it to be, or perhaps you'd like to suggest where else my royal consort should stand. The emphasis she placed on royal consort sent a ripple through the nearby quarters. It was the first time she'd used the title publicly. Chancellor Darius's scales ped to a sickly yellow. Your Majesty, surely you can't mean to legitimize this arrangement. I can, and I have. Nera rose from her throne, her black and gold dress catching the light. Jeffrey Canane has proven himself worthy of his position through merit, loyalty. And she paused, a slight smile playing at her lips. Exceptional service to the crown. Jeffrey bit back a grin at the double entendre. Their private jokes had become one of his favorite parts of their relationship, along with the moments when Nera let her guard down completely, showing him the woman behind the queen. The reception continued, but the whispers took on a different tone. The human who had started as a pleasure slave was now officially the queen's consort. It was unprecedented, scandalous, and absolutely thrilling to the gossip-hungry court. Later that night, in the privacy of her chambers, Nera paced while Jeffrey lounged on their favorite shum. You realize what I've done? She asked, running her fingers through her white hair. I've basically announced to the entire court that you're more than just that we're what? Jeffrey prompted, enjoying her rare moment of uncertainty. She stopped pacing and fixed him with those steel gray eyes. That I care for you, that this isn't just about physical satisfaction anymore, that somehow you insufferable human, you've made yourself essential to me. Jeffrey stood and walked to her, taking her cool hands in his warm ones. Is that such a terrible thing? It's dangerous, she whispered, for both of us. The council, the noble houses, they'll see it as weakness. They'll try to use it against us. Let them try. He pulled her closer. You're the most powerful being I've ever met, Nera, and I'm not exactly helpless myself. Together we're stronger than apart. She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. When did you become so wise? Probably around the same time you started becoming more human. She pulled back to glare at him, but there was no real heat in it. I am not becoming human. No, he grinned. Then why did I catch you humming that Earth song I taught you in the bath yesterday? Research, she said primly. Know thy enemy. And all that enemy? He raised an eyebrow. Is that what we're calling it now? Instead of answering, she kissed him, effectively ending the conversation. As they moved toward the bee, Jeffrey reflected on how far they'd come from that first night when he'd expected to die. Now death was the furthest thing from his mind. The whispers in the court might grow louder, the challenges might become greater, but in this moment, with Nera in his arms, Jeff knew they'd face whatever came next together. And if anyone had a problem with that, well, they'd soon learn why. Humans had a reputation for being unstoppable when protecting what they loved. The ancient temple of lunar blessing glowed with bioluminescent crystals, casting ethereal patterns across the gathered nobility. Jeffrey stood beside Nera at the temple's entrance, both dressed in traditional ceremonial attire, he in flowing silver robes that complemented his tan skin, she in a diaphanous gown of pale blue that made her lavender skin seem to shimmer. Remind me again why we're doing this, Jeffrey whispered, eyeing the ornate altar ahead. The fertility rites are sacred to my people, Nia replied, her fingers intertwining with his. As queen, I must participate in the ceremony with my chosen consort to ensure the prosperity of our realm, and the fact that it's essentially a public blessing of royal coupling doesn't bother you. Her lips curved into that familiar, mysterious smile. My people have different views on intimacy than humans, Jeffrey. Here, it's a celebration of life, power, and continuation. The high priestess approached, her robes rippling like liquid moonlight. Your Majesty, the stars align. We must begin. The ceremony was unlike anything Jeffrey had experienced. Incense filled the air with sweet, intoxicating aromas. Crystalline bells chimed in harmonic patterns that seemed to resonate with his very bones. The High Priestess led them through ancient rituals, speaking in a language that seemed to dance between sound and light. But it was the way NAA looked at him that took his breath away. Her steel gray eyes held something new: vulnerability, trust, and perhaps something deeper that neither of them had dared name yet. The sacred oils, the priestess announced, presenting an iridescent vial to bless the union and open the pathways of creation. As the oil was applied to their foreheads, Jeffrey felt a curious warmth spread through his body. Nera gasped softly beside him, her skin taking on a subtle glow. The oils enhance natural compatibility, she explained in a whisper. They're said to align life forces. Is that what we're calling it now? He teased, earning a subtle elbow to his ribs. The ceremony proceeded, building in intensity. The gathered nobles watched with rapt attention as their queen and her human consort completed each ritual step. Some looked scandalized, others intrigued, but all seemed amazed at how naturally they moved together. Finally, the High Priestess raised her arms. The blessing is complete. May the sacred chambers witness your union and grant the realm its future. They were led to a private chamber deep within the temple, its walls lined with the same bioluminescent crystals that seemed to pulse in rhythm with their heartbeats. Once alone, Nera turned to Jeffrey. The oils, they're affecting you differently than expected. Good differently, or bad differently, unprecedented differently. She placed a hand on his chest, her eyes widening. Your life force, it's incredibly strong. Most species can barely tolerate the enhancement, but you know as humans. He grinned, pulling her closer. We're full of surprises. Their connection that night was unlike any before. The sacred oils amplified every sensation, every touch, every shared breath. The temple's ancient magic seemed to weave around them, binding them in ways neither had anticipated. Hours later, as they lay entwined in the ceremonial chamber, Nera traced patterns on Jeffrey's chest. The council won't be happy about what, specifically the ceremony, the oils, the fact that their queen chose a human consort, about what the crystals revealed. She propped herself up on one elbow, her white hair cascading over her shoulders. They're recording crystals, Jeffrey. They measure compatibility, potential life force alignment. No pairing in recorded history has ever made them glow that brightly. Jeffrey sat up, suddenly alert. What does that mean? It means, she said slowly, that according to our most sacred measurements, you and I are not just compatible, we're optimal, perfect for creation, as in continuing the royal line. She bit her lip, an endearingly human gesture she picked up from him. The crystals indicate we could conceive a human Neran hybrid. It's never been done before. Jeffrey absorbed this information, his mind racing. Is that something you want? I never thought it was possible, she admitted. My species, we rarely reproduce successfully, even among our own kind. It's why the fertility rites are so important. But with you, she placed his hand over her abdomen. The crystals don't lie, Jeffrey. We could make history. We seem to be doing that a lot lately, he said softly, pulling her close. First human to survive your bedroom, first human consort, and now potentially the first to father a hybrid royal heir. Are you afraid? Terrified, he admitted with a laugh, but also excited. Though I have to ask, is this just about continuing the royal line? Nera was quiet for a moment, then spoke so softly he almost missed it. No, it's about continuing us. The implications of that statement hung in the air between them. They'd come so far from their initial arrangement, from slave and queen, to something neither of them had expected to find. Well, then Jeffrey said, kissing her deeply, let's make some history. News of the fertility rites, unprecedented results, spread through the palace like wildfire. The recording crystals' brilliant reaction to Jeffrey and Nera's compatibility became the talk of every noble house, spawning both wonder and worry throughout the realm. 2 weeks after the ceremony, Jeffrey found Nera in her private study, surrounded by ancient scrolls. Her usual composed demeanor seemed slightly off. She'd been experiencing waves of dizziness and temperature fluctuations that weren't normal for her species. The royal archives finally released these, she said, without looking up, prophecies dating back to the First Dynasty. And Jeffrey, she lifted her steel gray eyes to meet his. You need to see this. He moved behind her chair, placing his Hands on her shoulders, the scroll she indicated was written in shimmering ink that seemed to move on the page. The translation beneath read, "When stars align and barriers fall, a child of two. West shall hear the call, born of ice and burning flame. The realm shall never be the same. Power, unprecedented change, unforeseen through union of warrior and queen. Well, that's not ominous at all." Jeffrey commented, massaging her tense shoulders. "Though ice and burning flame is a bit on the nose considering your natural body temperature and mine. There's more." Nera said, her voice unusually tight. "The prophecy speaks of this child either bringing about a golden age, or," she swallowed hard, "the complete dissolution of everything. We know that's quite a range of possibilities." He moved around to face her. "But something else is bothering you, isn't it?" She stood abruptly, swaying slightly. Jeff steadied her with strong hands. "I've been feeling a difference," she admitted. The royal physician confirmed it this morning. "I'm with child Jeffrey, our child." The world seemed to stop for a moment, then Jeffrey broke into a broad grin, lifting her off her feet in a very uncle display of joy. "That's wonderful, is it?" She didn't resist his embrace, but worry lined her face. "The prophecy's sin is ancient and vague, like all prophecies," he interrupted, "but our child, that's real." "That's now." A knock at the door interrupted them. The high priestess entered, her face grave. "Your Majesty, Lord Consort, forgive the intrusion, but we've discovered something disturbing." She held out a small vial of shifting purple liquid. "This was found in the Queen's evening tea. It's a fertility-blocking poison designed to prevent the prophecy from coming true. Had Her Majesty not already conceived, it would have made further attempts impossible." Jeffy's joy turned to rage. "Who house vex?" the priestess replied. "They've long opposed the mixing of royal blood with other species, but there's more. They've allied with 3 other noble houses to challenge your rule, Your Majesty. They claim that carrying a hybrid child makes you unfit to rule." Nearest temperature dropped dangerously low. "Her species equivalent of anger. They dare, my love," Jeffrey said softly, using the endearment for the first time in public. "Remember what we discussed about human approaches to problem solving?" A slight smile curved her lips. "You mean your philosophy of hit them so hard they never think of getting up again?" "Exactly." He turned to the priestess. "Call the royal guard. I think it's time for a demonstration of why humans have a reputation for being protective of their families." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity, Jeffrey drawing on his military background, a part of his history he'd never explained. Coordinated with the royal guard. Nera, despite his protest, insisted on being part of the operation. "I am not some delicate flower," she reminded him as they prepared. "I'm still the queen, who was legendary for her insatiability." Remember, he couldn't argue with that. The raid on House Vex's compound was swift and decisive. Jeffrey led from the front, his combat skills shocking the conspirators who dismissed him as merely the queen's plaything. Nera's power, combined with her new protective fury over their unborn child, was terrifying to behold. By dawn, the rebellion was crushed. The loyal houses impressed by the display of both strength and mercy. The conspirators were imprisoned rather than executed. Nera's newfound humanity showing through, pledged renewed allegiance to the crown in their private chambers afterward. Jeffrey held Nera close, still worried about the prophecy a little, she admitted. "But I'm starting to think maybe the change unforeseen isn't about destruction, maybe it's about evolution. Look how much we both changed already." "Speaking of change," he said, placing a hand on her still flat abdomen,